Welcome to Black Muse, a conversation series celebrating the lineage, creativity, and ever evolving expression of Black culture. My name is Doris Davenport, and I am a contributing correspondent to Black Muse Podcast. Black Muse Podcast is produced by the Chicago West Community Music Center, founded by Howard and Darlene Sandifer, where the mission is to empower Black youth and uplift community through music, mentorship, and the continued creation of Black music. Today, we're joined by trumpeter, composer, and educator Marquis Carroll, whose work embodies everything reimagining jazz represents, bridging heritage and innovation, artistry and activism, sound and soul. This 10-week jazz series we've been talking about at Chicago West Community Music Center helps young musicians discover how jazz can be both ancestral and revolutionary. How are you, sir? Thank you so much for welcoming us here to your beautiful school. I love this classroom.
Yeah. It's a wonderful space, so we got to share it.
Absolutely. Well, we've got a lot of ground I'd like to cover today. So I want to start first with roots and heritage.
Mm-hmm.
You were born into a musical family in St. Louis.
You doing your homework.
And that's a lineage that I learned runs from your grandfather's work with Clark Terry
Yes, ma'am.
to your mentorship under Wynton
A
Marsalis.
little bit, yes, ma'am.
So what was it like growing up and surrounded by musicians who lived and breathed the culture?
I was just telling one of my colleagues a second ago, I loved hanging out with old people. My grandfather and my grandmother, and these are my dad's parents, and even my mom's mom were musicians. They were artists. They were entertainers. And my grandmother was an educator though too. So, and my grandfather, it is right. And I learned life lessons through there. It wasn't just the music. I think as a young kid, I was already listening to my dad's 8 tracks in his Camaro, Earth, Wind and Fire and Larry Graham and all those folks. But I just gravitated to jazz music. It was kind of a thing. And I was kind of a big kid. And so everybody thought I'd be playing football. I played baseball. But I think I was about 8 years old is when my granddad brought over a trumpet. I still have his horn. It cost him $50. We didn't have a lot of money. And I made one sound out of it. And the next week I was in lessons. That's how it went. And I was like, I had no idea that at that time I'd be 39 years later doing what I'm doing. It just kind of happened. One foot after the other, one step after the other, one opportunity after the other. I didn't have a band program in grade school because we didn't have a band. So I did a thing called Sunrise Conservatory in St. Louis. And, I think her name was Miss Brown. The young lady taught trumpet and got me going. And then my folks split, and then I had to move to a new school, which then had a band program. So, and then I played at church. My granddad sang. He was a tenor. So of course I sang tenor. But I got a lot of my playing and anxiety out the way at church. I still have a hard time playing at church. I don't know why. I'm like, I get nervous that guys like, come on now, So I learned to play in church. I learned to read. I was classically trained. I had some great trumpet teachers. Clark Terry was somebody I didn't even know to be honest. I had no idea who Clark was. I thought I would hang out with my grandfather at his friend's auto mechanics shop. His other friend had a shoe store. So Clark Terry to me was just like this other old guy. And he'd be like, we're going to go see Clark. I'm like, okay, bring your horn. Okay. Play some notes. Okay. You never know at all. And then I got about middle school, teenage years. I was like, oh, that's Clark Terry. Went to his camp a couple of times, learned. I was hanging out with Snooky Young, Marshall Royal. Still, I had no idea who these guys were until I got older. I met Wynn around the same time, and Wynn was just on fire around that time, and I was in a program called Honors Music, which provided free music, free lessons. This is very much like what the Sandifers are doing. It was like, we went there. I was the youngest. I was in 5th grade with high school kids. They didn't care. It was like, you don't play what we play. So I learned there, I think, how to just read and the joy of music, the discipline of practice, wanting something and having a lot. The people who taught there were actually people my grandfather taught. So this was full circle.
Oh, yeah.
So him and Clark were in Tom Powell Poe's drum and bugle corps. So the guys that my grandfather taught were some of the teachers at this honors music program. So I'm learning not only just from them, but what they were taught from my grandfather and Clark and all these other people.
Dig a little deeper into that. When you talk about like Clark Terry and Wynton Marsalis, talk about, how they helped shape your whole philosophy of discipline, like you mentioned, and your sound.
Man, okay. So Clark, when you listen to Clark Terry, there's an element of blues and Wynton as well, but Clark has a sound when he plays, it's distinct. As you listen to music, every artist has their own voice, right? You have your own voice. Even how you speak. As first time I ever heard you speak, I'm like, yeah, that's recognizable, right? Clark's voice on the horn is just like, that's it. That's Clark Terry. And some of that, my first lesson with him was like, let's hear you swing on this note. One note. And that's hard. You tell a young person to not play all that stuff and just do one thing. I was like, okay, how do you do that? And he was getting me to work on my time, my phrasing, call and response within the play. This I didn't know this at the time. This is what I've learned after the fact, right? And then focusing on your sound all of that. That's one full lesson right there. You know what I mean? It wasn't like I was getting consecutive lessons. This was like, all right, I'll see you in about 6 months, because that's probably when he'll come back, or a year from now when he visited St. Louis to play. So I got that from him. With Wynton, I was in a Wynton phase by this time. So I'm like, everything Wynton did was like, man, how do you play that fast? How do you play? Man, you playing the blues like that? How I was about 11 or 12 when I met him, and I was more impressed by just who he was as a person. I think over the years, every year I'd see him, he remembered me. He'd be like, oh yeah, what's going on? Boom, 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 and that was impressive from a artistry and a professional thing. Not everybody remembers of, youth. And he's one of those people that his memory is really good.
But it also sounds like he might have had such a seasoned ear that he picked up on your sound before you might even figure out your email.
Probably. And the funny thing is, I can remember playing for him several times, and I think the relationship budded more as I became an educator, though. It was more I stepped into education, which I didn't plan on doing. I did not. My grandfather told me to go to school and get my education degree, and I was like, I'm not doing that. I'm going to be a famous jazz musician, whatever that means. And I went to school to get education or jazz performance, and I found myself starting to like education. I started to find myself seeing a need for what I learned to get back. That's when I think Wynton and I actually became a little bit closer, in as far as he come to town, I bring my kids to go see him. I did the same thing my grandfather did. I'm like, you need to get in front of him, go bring horn. They nervous hood, And I learned from him just about nurturing young people, keeping tradition alive, which is it's a lost art form. In the world of jazz education on a higher level, I don't see a lot of my kids there. I just don't. I don't see a lot of kids that look like me in those spaces. I don't see a lot of educators that look like me in those spaces. And that concerns me. We're talking about American music that comes out of Black culture. Why don't I see more of us in those spaces? That frustrates me. So I think I found or made my duty, or as I've talked to God about it, I said, man, you got me doing something I wasn't planning on doing, so I'm going to keep doing it. So what am I supposed to do? It's not everybody, Sean Jones and I talked about it. He said, you're doing it. I was comparing myself to what he was doing. He's like, brother. He's like, you were doing what you're supposed to be doing. That's literally what he talked about. So I get a lot, I think, when I look at Wynton and see how he does it at his level, I'm doing it at my level, right?
So I just want to say, Wynton's level is not up here.
No.
And your level here.
Yes.
Because it's all God's level.
Right.
And what Wynton is doing for people is what he's supposed to be doing.
Right.
And what the people who are benefiting from what you're doing see you way up here.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I need to be reminded, trust me, because Sean said the same thing.
It's so true. It's so true. But education, as we know, this is thankless.
It is.
This is why we need a certain kind of God-driven person at those roles. I look at the Sandifers. The average person would never do what they do.
No.
Ever, ever.
No.
Because the rewards are minimal.
Yeah.
But it's being able to see those kids and see where they go. That's the reward.
Yeah.
But you talk a lot about tradition. And if I think about your St. Louis heritage, if you were to play, if somebody listened to you play your trumpet today, what kind of St. Louis heritage would we hear echoed in your trumpet?
It's the sound. It's the trumpet players come out of St. Louis. I mean, I gotta, first it starts with Clark for me, and then there's Miles. And Miles Clark was one of his mentors.
Really?
Oh yeah, Clark. Go read Clark Terry's autobiography. It's wild. It's really wild. He talks about how, if it's not in that book, I was told this story that Miles ended up stealing Clark's some things because Miles was out at the time, and Clark never. He's like, I still love you, So, but Clark, Miles, when I was coming up, Russell Gunn, who's now in Atlanta, beautiful trumpet player. We all look up to him. Jeremy Davenport, whose parents were in the symphony, and he's down in New Orleans, been there for about 25 plus years. Wonderful trumpet player. My buddy Danny Campbell, who was one of my mentors when I was coming up, he's still in St. Louis playing. He's like God to us. Like everybody wanted to be Danny Campbell. Anthony Wiggins, who's now a minister, who was one of the greatest, still playing. Jason Brewer, these are Keon Harold, who I grew up with.
Is it?
I'm gonna put myself in the mix, and then my buddy Quentin Colton, who's also here in Chicago. Like there's a thing about St. Louis trumpet players that are, I think there's a distinct approach of what we do. There's a grit to what we do in our sound, and the blues has to be there. This music is in jazz. I'm speaking. I think gets somewhat too cerebral. You know what I mean? And it gets too heady, and that's where that education comes in, where people teach this, the changes, this and that, and it sounds too AI. I'll use that term. And there's a soulfulness that happens that I think that St. Louis has. Chicago's got a soulfulness. Kansas City has so there's a thing about New York and LA. Each spot has its thing, but for me, St. Louis trumpet players just have a bluesiness and a chord to a church thing to their sound. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do.
That's what I get. So
you've often called yourself a storyteller at heart, using melody to speak truth. When did you realize that the trumpet could actually say something beyond the note?
I'm gonna try not to cry. I'm an emotional person. My father, Mark Carroll, is a great a novice bass player. I got his old 70s P bass at the house. He loved the thing. But he's a graphic designer. He's an artist. And he told me when I was a kid, he said, you're an artist. And I was like, I'm a trumpet player. That's what I do. And it wasn't until I think I started leaving college to figure out my career, which is different now than 2001, which is wild to even speak about. But I think at that time, as I was developing my sound and my profession, I'm like, man, I guess I'm an artist, but I'm not. And it wasn't honestly until COVID the pandemic is when I woke up. Pandemic was like the best time for me to realize that I need to do something instead of talking about it.
Really?
I had been playing for years. I had been gigging in the city of Chicago. I had been leading groups, but I never recorded a record. And I'm a history buff. I love history. I love being able to talk to people about the things that people don't want to talk about because it's hard. I don't mind hard conversations. I'm not trying to be right, but I don't want things to be lost, especially lost in translation, right? So for me, when the pandemic hit is when I worked on my first 2 records, Ancestors Call and Foundations. And I was writing a bunch of music and I was tired of seeing what was happening at that time. We all know what was going on. And it's the same story. America is broken. And we have never healed. We have never really together said, you know what? Our ancestors, all of them, made mistakes. And we can either continue those mistakes or we can say it stops now. And we've never done that. You know what I mean? And people don't want to talk about this. They let it go by. They don't want to acknowledge sometimes how great Black culture is and what we've contributed, what our ancestors contributed. They are the foundation of America, in my opinion. And I will stand on that all day, you know. And so I feel it a duty to make sure that I'm making them proud by the work that I do and the stories I'm able to tell and the history I'm able to give to people, you know. When I do I play at Andy's every first weekend of the month. It's a residency. And I'll let folks know, you know, here's the song we're playing. And this is why I wrote the song. I wrote a suite for Claudette Colvin. Not too many people know who Claudette Colvin is. I'm like, do we know Rosa Parks? Yes. But did you know Claudette at 15 did the same exact thing before her? Before King got involved. This young lady at 15 was tired of older people not doing their job, so she said, I'm going to do it. Say 15. I'm like, how many 15-year-olds do I know that will stand up like that? That's huge, and that's looked over. I didn't know about this myself until I taught English here for a year.
Really?
And I taught that, and I forget the other book that we read, but that particular book in her life changed me about even further about what I need to be doing. You know, and so a lot of the pieces I do write, I think as jazz artists specifically, and artists in general, but jazz artists, the ones I love the most are Nina Simone and Max Roger.
Yeah.
And Mingus. Mingus is fierce. Mingus was like, I don't care. We don't talk about it. Jack McLean, you know, Gary Bartz, people like that who are actively letting their music let folks know, hey, wake up.
See, that's the activist in you. I mean, it's like, what does it mean to be a conscious musician, to like use your music for healing, for resistance, for dialogue?
Right. I think that's why it's here. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, this music is freedom. That's what it was. Our people wanted freedom. And the only way that they could have freedom at that time was through song, dance, food. That's our culture. That was our freedom. So at the end of the day, if we're going to create this music, classical music, jazz music, people don't even call it, the greats didn't call it jazz. That was a label placed on the music. Nicholas Payton has gotten a lot of slack about it, but Black American music is what it is. Or Duke Ellington would call, I believe, Black classical American music. We didn't have a label. They was like, we playing music. Why? Because we just want freedom. Freedom to express ourselves. Freedom to tell our story. That's what we're doing. Because why did you write that song? Well, I wrote it because I went through this or whatever it may be. You know, so that's the stuff that's super important to me. So I teach that. It's not just in my writing, in my performance. I think it's a duty for me to let even my audience know, hey, this is what you're listening to. And as I teach young kids, third grade, college, whatever it is, that's the message they'll receive from me. It's not going to be what other teachers give you. And it doesn't mean what they're giving you is wrong, but here's this other thing. You know what I mean? And we're missing the boat when we don't do that, because then we miss history. And then we know what happens when we don't tell all the history.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
We don't tell all the history, then it's just what Public Enemy said is his story.
His story, because if you don't tell it, somebody else will. Just a couple of more questions and to focus on this series, Reimagining Jazz. Mm-hmm. If we look at reimagining jazz in practice, at the core of Howard and Darlene's vision for Chicago West Community Music Center is the belief that jazz is not a relic, that it's a living, breathing art form carried by the next generation. And that's what they're busy doing every day. So when you hear the phrase reimagining jazz, what does it mean to you personally?
The first thing that comes to mind is, of course, the tradition, right? We've been at it for some weeks now, and I'm honored that Howard and them asked me to do this, honestly, because they could ask anybody. So that shows a lot of love and trust. So thank you, Howard and Darlene. But the first thing I think about is the tradition. Like, what are the kids, you know, and these kids I'm looking at, they're not young kids. There's a wide range of young people that don't actually know, which is why they're here. They're making a conscious decision to be here, and they're bringing in ideas of like, this is what I want to do. I'm like, great, that's not exactly it. So we get to help you understand that your vision, let's give you this piece to understand why you might like this piece of music. Like a young lady said she liked Amy Winehouse. I'm like, that's great. But do you realize what the song that you chose is actually this? So it's been real fun to to take them backwards a little bit to then get to how they want to reimagine this particular song, maybe, or the arrangement of it, or bring in their new. For me, I want every student to take this music. It should keep evolving. There's 12 notes in our Western music, right? So it's like, how do you keep making it sound so hip year after year, century? Every 10 years, Miles was like really creating something new. I want young people to have a voice, and I like this piece or this style. How do I fuse that together? Because music, jazz should not continue to sound like bebop is wonderful, right? But we shouldn't keep playing bebop because it's not evolving. I think even Charlie Parker would be like, what are y'all doing? This should have changed right now, right? So I think one of my goals is to accept that students where they're at in their love for this music, to build more love for this music, to have them at some point be like, man, I got to create this long playlist of all this other stuff that I want to get to.
Yeah.
So they're not omitting, because I think if we're not supporting their vision while also giving them this history of it, this gets lost and then it's just this.
That's right.
And we don't do that in the classical world.
Yeah.
You study this, you got to go all the way back.
Yeah.
Our music is 100+ years old. It's not that old, actually. We have to take care of that.
And you have to make sure the next generation is prepared. My last question for today.
Today, that means we're going to have another.
That's right. We have to. Howard has already told me there are 2 other subjects he wants to cover with you. So, yeah, I think we'll be doing this again.
Okay, all right.
But the Sandifers, when they founded Chicago West Community Music Center to restore creative access for West Siders, especially West Side youth, with the intention of making music a path toward what they call collective uplift. Why is community-based arts education essential for keeping Black music alive?
Students need to understand, young people, and this is why I'm here. You guys are at Chicago Jesuit Academy, okay? This school was designed to help young people on the west side of Chicago have a different type of opportunity. I am convinced that when students have a space to go be creative, a space to work on social emotional skills that go into music and arts, they will then understand themselves better. They will most likely add to society, want to understand society a little bit better and not take away from it. And I'm watching a lot of young people make decisions, but mature young people decisions that are not helping them or their community. And I think this music, from jazz to classical to pop, funk, everything, to me, it's all related. And I think when you give the students a space to do that, man, it'll continue to grow. They get people that care about them. This is my first year really working with them, and it's really fun to watch. I'm watching my grandparents personally. Like, they have old school values that a lot of young folks are missing. And I think that community, they talk about it takes a village to raise. That's what this is.
Yeah.
It's really a group of people who are like-minded that are like, hey, let's come together. We're going to build. And hopefully when we're all gone, this is still standing. 50, 100 years from now, even more, right? We should have people that went through the program that see how important it is to continue. That's what this is about.
Marquis Carroll?
Yes, ma'am.
It's been a pleasure.
You too.
Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you for joining us as well. This has been Black Muse Podcast, produced by Chicago West Community Music Center, where Black music lives, grows, and leads us forward. My name is Doris Davenport, contributing correspondent.